Modern Wuxuan County is in the Guangxi Zhuang Autonomous Region in the south of China. It is a pretty quiet part of the country, with lots of green farmlands and busy small towns. There is nothing in the area that would suggest that in the late 1960s, during the height of China's Cultural Revolution led by Mao Zedong, local Red Guards and communist officials humiliated and hurt their opponents in horrible ways. But no one would have known how bad the fear was until a Chinese writer wrote about it in the early 1990s. He found levels of cruelty, depravity, and even cannibalism that had never been seen before in what is now known as the Guangxi Massacre. Mao's Cultural Revolution causes chaos. Mao Zedong, the leader of China, initiated the Great Leap Forward initiative in 1958. This was a poorly planned campaign with the intention of transforming the country into an economic superpower. The consequences were catastrophic. More than 50 million people perished as a result of the Great Chinese Famine that followed, and tens of thousands more perished as a result of a series of tragedies that were tied to it. As a result, Mao was compelled to acknowledge his failure in 1962 and step down from his position as president. However, he continued to hold the position of leader of the Communist Party. However, the humiliated leader refused to accept even a little demotion, and he proceeded to begin preparing his way back to the position of supremacy almost immediately. He made this statement on May 16, 1966, when he openly accused a number of high-ranking leaders of being counter-revolutionary revisionists who were scheming to undermine his party from inside. The Red Guards were a group of aggressive and idealistic students who idolized Mao and violently opposed anyone suspected of disloyalty. They also expelled any dissenters who were in opposition to their leadership. Mao extended his blessing to the Red Guards shortly after. In the midst of the frenzy, ordinary folks lost trust in national politics and turned against each other. This occurred as local administrations collapsed under the incessant assaults of Red Guards and the internal disputes that occurred within factions. Ordinary individuals viewed one another as class enemies that needed to be eliminated while there was such a heightened environment about. An outbreak of violence, including lynchings, torture, and other forms of violence, occurred as a result of a conflict between civilians. Citizens cannibalized their political opponents. Uprisings that were violent took place in every region of the country. Struggle sessions became a common type of punishment in China. During these sessions, members of the Chinese Communist Party publicly humiliated and tortured those who were opposed to the party's policies. However, these gatherings frequently descended into exceedingly violent behavior, and in certain areas, they even went into cannibalism. Cannibalism had been practiced in China during the Great Famine out of desperation or necessity. But by the late 1960s, food supplies had been recovered to a significant degree. Therefore, it is impossible that starvation was the cause of the widespread cannibalism demonstrations that took place in Guangxi. The real cause was political hatred. According to one eyewitness, all the cannibalism was due to class struggle being whipped up and was used to express a kind of hatred. The murder was ghastly, worse than beasts. In Wuxuan County, where officials invoked a gruesome custom of devouring their opponents' hearts, livers, and genitals, some of the most heinous demonstrations of this kind took place. In 1968, students at Wuxuan Middle School brutally murdered their geography teacher by beating her to death. They then dragged her body to the banks of the Chen River, where they forced another teacher to remove her heart and liver. This horrifying practice began. When the pupils returned to the school, they prepared and consumed the organs. It has also been stated that senior officials participated in flesh banquets, in which they reserved the tender hearts and livers of their adversaries in struggle sessions for themselves to stew with spices and pork. Pecking at the victims' arms and thighs was the sole activity that citizens with lower ranks were permitted to do. a member of the Communist Party by the name of Wang Wenliu, gained a reputation for either consuming male genitals or preserving them in alcohol. Beijing became aware of her bloody habit after she was promoted, and it sought to know the reason why she had not been expelled from the party due to her behavior. After further inspection, it was discovered that she had, in fact, restricted her diet to only liver and meat. Although she was demoted, she was permitted to continue working for the party. The Communist Party then saw a particularly violent rebellion in May of 1968, which resulted in one chairman being dismembered and mobbed by the party's members. His head and a leg bone were hung in a public area. Following this, members of the Red Guard found his brother, severely beaten him, and then forced him into a sewer pit, where they proceeded to remove his heart and liver while he was still capable of breathing. A little time later, other people removed the flesh from his body, and then they disposed of his bones in the river. For nearly a decade, the citizens of Guangxi were plagued by beheadings, beatings, live burials, stonings, drownings, boilings, group slaughters, disembowelings, digging out hearts, livers, genitals, slicing off flesh, blowing up with dynamite, and more, with no method unused. There were 137 persons who were consumed across the region, according to the official count. However, the actual number of fatalities is probably hundreds higher. Of those documented, at least 38 incidents of cannibalism took place in Wuxuan County. As one participant in the Guangxi Massacre later proudly claimed, "In Wuxuan, we ate more people than anywhere else in China." An end to the violence. Late in 1968, Mao Zedong issued an order that thousands of Red Guards be sent down to work in the countryside, bringing an end to the most violent phase of the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution came to an end on September 9, 1976, when Mao Zedong passed away. The Guangxi Massacre persisted for a considerable amount of time, yet there were still instances of political violence and lynching. Following the commencement of a campaign with the goal of eliminating chaos and returning to normal, a period of purging was implemented. A small number of those who were found to be responsible for the violence in Guangxi were given prison sentences, dozens were kicked out of the party, and dozens more were demoted or given wages that were reduced. Following that, Beijing's official stance was to forget and deny that cannibalism had ever taken place in Guangxi, or at the very least, that they had been aware of it. Nevertheless, the central government had been aware of the Wang Wenliu case, and researchers discovered 20 years later that at least one message had been sent to the capital detailing the disaster. The message simply said, "People are eating each other." If the essayist Zheng Yi had not been to Guangxi in 1986 to examine the cannibalism rumors that had been going around for 20 years, it is possible that the horrible events that occurred during the Guangxi Massacre would have been forgotten. Yi, a former member of the Red Guard who had been stationed in Guangxi during the Cultural Revolution, was able to successfully overcome the official hush that permeated the killing. Over time, he was able to acquire access to official papers that provided evidence that both local and national authorities were aware of the brutalities that occurred both while and after they occurred. Having been arrested for his participation in the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989, Yi did not start writing his exposé until after he had been arrested for his involvement in the demonstrations. During his 2 years of hiding out, he finished writing a book that detailed the atrocities that occurred in Guangxi. He then released the book under a pseudonym and fled to the United States of America through Hong Kong. Memorials honoring those who lost their lives during the Chinese Civil War, the Japanese invasion, and other tragic and deadly events may be seen all over China. These memorials are scattered around the country. For fear of destabilizing their rule and weakening their authority, the Communist Party has never admitted to what occurred in Guangxi in 1968. This is because they have never admitted to the events. Because of this, the people who survived the violence in Wuxuan have never been given formal acknowledgement for the ordeal they went through. We hope you liked this video. Watch another video here.